than your currency. Splurging millions, buying houses like Monopoly. Fucking 9 to 5, man, the money is a joke to me. Buying cryptocurrency, my money.
Hey guys and girls, welcome to this week's episode of the OBS with Birchy podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Birch. This is a show unraveling the truth to the facade of the 21st century. We're now exiting the matrix and waking up to motherfucking reality. Well, we know that the media is a weapon. We know that the car industry and automobiles out there are the assets of the banks. We know that the government is middle management of the bigger system, and we know that the police are the security guards for the rich and the ultra-powerful. What a lot of people don't realise is that your house, you think that your house is your asset, but is it really your asset? Is it an asset, right? We go back to Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he says your house is not an asset. I actually have a different take on that, and that is that the house is an asset, but if you take it back, the house is just a house, right? That's all the house is. But the house is the asset of the banks. The house, or the apartment, or whatever property it is the cash flow of the banking system. So they have turned a property into a derivative. And I stopped going into the media. I used to be on the TV. I was on the TV for over like 100 times. I used to go in for interviews and all that sort of stuff. But I realised that the media was utilising, look at this dumb, Western Sydney bogan bloke. He can, he's successful using property, and everybody should get in the debt, etc., etc. So there was very closed parameters of what you can talk about on TV, and I know it's very, very scripted. That's why I don't like it. I tried to give them really good advice. They cut it out. They don't put it in there, and they have their own agendas behind it. I realised that every time I went on the TV, what I was doing is that I was the puppet of the controlling powers, right? And the central banks were pumping out more money. I was being used as a political, conversation. I remember going on to ABC, and they were trying to say, it was the negative gearing, these rich people with negative gearing, taking it away from the first home buyers and all this. And there's all these discussions, the avocado on toast, right? The older, the retirees, it's their problem. They're the baby boomers are the ones that are taking all the money. It's everybody else's problem, but it's not the central banks. No one's ever questioned and said, hey, it's the central banks robbing us here. It's the banking system that's robbing us here. And that is exactly what is happening. So your house is an asset. It's just not your asset, right? Your house is the asset of the banking system. Whether you have a mortgage or you don't have a mortgage, your house is still the asset of the banking system. You, as the mortgage holder, signing the mortgage, I think it's Latin that mortgage stands for death contract. So mort and gage is death and contract. The mortgage, you are the asset of the banker, right? So it's the banker's best interest to get more people connected and signed up to this system so they have more assets to their system. So let me explain this and go on to a little bit further. So I was at a Bucks party with one of my mates. He had in his backyard recently, and they had everyone come over, and I was there, and I was talking to a couple of his mates, and I was talking about the loudness of we're talking business, and we're talking about the drums and all that sort of stuff going. And then I was like, everybody's house that's around here, people think, I'm going to pay off my mortgage, right? Everyone's trying to pay off their mortgage and pay out their debt. Someone thinks they can go and pay out a mortgage, and they go, okay, I'm going to stop paying 3% interest. Like, that's the dumbest thing, right? If you're in this world today in 2022 and you have debt at 3% interest, inflation is greater than 3% interest, right? If you're paying off 3%, you have to, let's say you've got $1 million debt, you have to go out and earn $1 million to pay out that debt. But if you had $1 million in your account and you have $1 million loan, you're just saying you can't get a better return than 3%. 3% isn't even keeping up with inflation today. But let's go back another couple of steps. If you had to earn $1 million to pay out your $1 million debt, you'd probably have to earn $1.5 million, pay all the taxes, and then, pay off that debt. It's very, very rigged game, right? And that's why a lot of people are failing in it, and they're becoming trapped in this system. Cash flow is important, the capital is important, and being able to control assets is important. Very, very important. But when most people are working out how to save some cash flow, but they're not looking at how can I create more assets. When the bank is growing its asset base, they're getting more people signed up to mortgages, they're getting larger mortgage amounts being written, and they're getting more cash flow coming in through their bank. So the whole system is designed, specifically the banking system. Your house has become a derivative. They need people to enter this system, and that's why they incentivize them, right? You've got first home agreements. Currently, you could get about $50,000 as a first home buyer to buy a brand new property. They're the stimulus packages from the government, which is the middle management to this system, to incentivize for more people to be able to go back to the banking system, collect more debt, and pay more for these assets. Ultimately, if we look at the greater fool theory, which is, someone has something and they go sell it to the next person, next person, next person. If it's like musical chairs and the chairs disappear and the lights come on, who's holding the bag? And that is something that you need to be looking at. Like we hear about, the property market's going to explode. We're going to see house prices crash by 30%, etc. No, if the whole system was to crash, if anything was to go wrong like that, what would happen is not just the house prices would crash. If the house prices came back 20%, how many loans were originated for property transactions in the last 3 or 4 years? If the property market came back by 20%, that means that the bank would have no security left in the deal, right? That means that the whole banking and finance system that underpins everything, which controls your government, which controls your everything in society, would be at risk of imploding. Why would they allow that to occur? They just need to create a bigger Ponzi scheme to replace the last Ponzi scheme and get the bigger, sucker to come along and pick up that asset and take that bag on it. People think that we're in a time where interest rates are going to rise. I'd love to see interest rates rise. If interest rates rise, everybody dies, right? It's not just, the property market crashes. Businesses that are taking on debt, they go. Governments that are taking on debt, they go. Homeowners that have taken on debt for $1 million or $1.5 million and got a house with no eaves attached to it, no backyard, they've got 50 square metres to play with the kids in the backyard, they're going to go broke. So if they push up interest rates, it's going to blow up the market. They're in a very, very dicey position. And looking at, the market, who really is the asset? What is the asset? When the bank gives you a mortgage, they're not looking at the property. They're looking at someone that's going to hook onto that fishing rod for them and be alive for 30 years to be able to service that debt whilst they package that debt up and then sell that debt off as a financial instrument. So let's look at it this way. Everybody's looking for a yield, right? Inside the bank, you have a thing called fractional reserve banking, which is if the bank takes in $100,000 worth of deposit money, i.e., there's money being placed in the bank of $100,000, they're allowed to lend out 9 times that. So they're allowed to lend out, if you go into the bank today and put $100,000 in as a fixed term deposit or whatever, then they have the security to then lend on 9 times more than that. So you've got $1 million that they can lend out. So if they're paying you 1% return, which is basically what they're paying for a fixed term deposit if you're lucky, 1% return on that, that means that they take your money, they give you 1% on $100,000, which is really $1,000 for the year. Thanks a lot. Here's $1,000. Don't spend it all at once, guys. You've got to pay some tax on that on the way out. You're going to lose 40% of that. You're going to get $600 for your $100,000. So they take that money and then they go and create another $900,000 behind it. And they can lend out $1 million at the back of the bank. When they do that, now they're selling that for, let's call it 3% interest. So 3% interest on $1 million is $30,000. So the net position of the bank is they're now making $29,000 a year by you depositing that and then finding a new sucker that's going to take on that debt that they've created from thin air. Right? They need to keep originating these loans, and that's in essence how they make their money. I'm going to make some more videos about how the banks can't fall and how deep this Ponzi scheme really is when it comes to that. But looking at the market, if the market was to crash, let's say the market comes back by 20%, 50%, who has the money to buy this? That means that the mortgage holder, which is the bank's asset, is in default and it's, negative equity and all that sort of stuff. The property is negative equity. It's not in the bank's interest for that to occur. So then they have to build a new Ponzi scheme, lower interest rates, put in new stimulus packages, print more money to keep this system alive, to keep feeding the beast. If we go and look at the stock market, just for example, and we're going to touch on the stock market for maybe 2 minutes to talk about this. If we look at the stock market, let's just take any company on the stock market. Let's call it Tesla, right? Or, Telstra, or any company, Woolworths, whatever company it is that you want to go look at. let's go and break down who owns the shares in those companies. So let's say you had 100 shares, just for hypothetical. Let's just say it's Tesla. You would find that probably the biggest stockholders in there might be someone like Elon Musk, for example, because he's a founder or whatever. He might own 10%. But then you would have some other companies called BlackRock and Vanguard, right? Those companies would hold maybe 5% each. So there's 20% of it held there. Then you'd have some other large stockholders that would be holding assets. But if you look at every single company on any stock market, so look at the ASX, look at the Dow Jones, look at who owns the largest amount of those companies. You will not find one company which is not owned by a company called BlackRock or Vanguard, right? You've got to question, who are these people? What are they buying? Who do they own? Whatever. When you go to Vanguard, they're off-market balance sheet transactions, right? They don't need to declare who owns what shares, who is invested in the fund. That's private knowledge. Don't ask that. Don't come here. So before any company goes to the stock market, they're in these companies and they've got them as their major shareholders on it. So if you think that, like Pepsi and don't like Coke, they're owned by the same people, right? You like going to Woolworths and you don't like going to Coles, they're owned by the same people. You don't actually, it's the same puppet master behind all these companies. But that aside, when we look at these stocks, you have the people that own the majority of the shares in the business, which could be hundreds of billions of dollars or whatever. But then you've got maybe 10% or 20% of these shares, which are trading around for the plebs, for the everyday punter, and they're on all the stock trading platforms. You can go and purchase these shares. If the shares $1 goes to $5, goes to $10, goes to $100, goes to $1,000, whatever it goes to, that is cool. It's the people that are trading that. But you have treasury funds, which are these entities that own, whether it's BlackRock or Vanguard or, in this instance, like Elon Musk, whoever it is. Their value is only worth what the people at the bottom are putting into this. So they need to keep expanding that. So then their treasury keeps expanding as well. So when it's to the property market, we need the activity flowing on to keep the bubble alive, but not enough to crash it, because it could implode very easily. And these markets, the bigger that they get, the easier it is for them to pop. But it could explode as well if they don't hold on to it too much. So that's where we're heading into the inflation territory, which is a very, very dicey game of, finding the middle ground between runaway hyperinflation and finding the market to implode. If the market was to implode on any of these assets, the whole system would collapse. The whole banking system, everybody's assets would disappear. It's not just the properties that would lose their value. It is all the people going broke. It's the whole system unfolding on itself. So getting back to the asset of the bank. So if people are looking for a yield, right, and you put $100,000 in the bank, they print off another $900,000. They are paying $1,000. They're getting $30,000. They're making $29,000 a year on that interest component they're renting out. Then their book value would be bringing in a 3%. They can then package up their business and then sell that book on as another value. So if the loan is, let's just call it $1 million loan, and it's over 30 years at $1 million, let's just say that the principal doesn't get paid down just at the fun of it because it's easy to calculate that way. $1 million, 3% a year, it's 30 grand a year. Over 10 years, it'd be 300 grand. Over 30 years, you'd be paying $1 million in interest. So you'd really be paying, double the amount of money back. That becomes a very attractive, investment option there. But if the string gets pulled down on the street level and houses start to fall or something starts going wrong, we're going to see that explode and go up the tree and blow everything up from the top. So, what is really the asset? And you've got to look at every, vantage point of the market. It's not just, is the market heated? Is the market hot? Is there, will they put up interest rates? There's so many guns that are pointed at the market. If one action gets pulled here, if the handbrake's pulled, the car spins out, and where does it fly? What direction does it fly in? It's a very, very careful market. We need to slowly, change things, and there's nowhere for it to go now. There's nowhere. It's either flying off the cliff or it is, flying down the freeway and it has no brakes and things are going to keep going at a really fast trajectory. And that's sort of where the market's at. So looking when your property, like most people are like, my house is my asset. Well, the house is an asset because it's something that's tangible. You can, trade it. You can do, lots of different things. But the property only has its value because you're comparing it to dollars and comparing it to currency, which is why if there was a depression or a recession and prices of everything would have fallen, no one had money, there would be no buyers, which would mean that it would have a big, massive impact on the market. So your house is an asset, but is it your asset or is it the banker's asset, right? And it's a very, weird discussion to be having because it's kind of trying to get very complex sort of situations and put them into bite-sized pieces so it's easy to explain in a 20-minute podcast. But whose asset is the property? Is it really your asset? Which it is, right? It's your asset, you own it, and all that sort of stuff. But the bigger asset at play is the banks, and it's the loan books. If we look at the car industry, right, I'm just going to touch on cars, right? If you go back before the GFC, so those of you that are old enough and you're not, 15 years old, 20 years old watching this, if you were to go back to 2006, 2007, 2008, there would have been cars littering the streets that were like a 1980 car, a 1970 car, a 1990 car. They were everywhere, right? But if you go to a car park now or look out on your main road, you would find maybe 1% of cars were old shit boxes from the 90s or beforehand, and the rest of them would be probably about 10 to 15 years old. If someone has a 15-year-old car today, it's like, oh, your car's really old. Why do you have that sort of car, etc.? And the reason why everyone has cars and they're so readily available nowadays is that the car is not the asset. When a car yard is selling you a car, they're not selling you a car. The car has very minimal sort of profits in making that car and selling the car. What has the profit is the loan that they attach because they've created a whole new debt-based industry. The reason why people can go and buy a $100,000 car now isn't because they've saved up $100,000. Let's just think about that, right? If you go online, I've just traded some cars and whatnot. If you go online, like a Ford Ranger Raptor, which is just a basic sort of, it's a U, right? It's a Ford, right? It's a U. It's pretty common. They're on every street. A Toyota Hilux, right? A Toyota Hilux, a 2-year-old Toyota Hilux, a decent model of them. They're selling for like 75, 80 grand. 2 years old for a car, right? A Ford Ranger, like 100 grand for this car. These are utes, right? These are tradie utes, right? And the prices of them are 100 grand. Let's just assume 100 grand or 50 grand or 80 grand, whatever the price is. If someone's on 50 grand a year, 80 grand a year, 100 grand a year, they're paying massive amounts for food, they're paying massive amounts for petrol, they're paying massive amounts for their TV, their white goods, whatever they're purchasing out there because we've got massive inflation. How long would it take someone to save 100 grand to go and buy a 2-year-old car, a second-hand car, to remind you, a second-hand Ford Ute, right? How long would it take someone to save 80 grand, 100 grand? It would take someone a year, probably not. It would probably take them 2 years. It would probably take them 3 years. That's a house deposit, right? Are people going out there and they're buying a car with cash, right? They're not. They're getting car loans, right? If people had to save up cash, the cars wouldn't be purchased because no one would have the cash to buy them. So there would be no market. So they have to inflate these financial products into the system. And as they create these financial products, it creates the opportunity for more buyers to go into that market. More buyers in the market creates more demand and it keeps that market alive and keeps going. Problem being is we've got Ponzi schemes on Ponzi schemes, right? We've now got Afterpay. We've got all these different sort of things where you can buy now, pay later. And those buy now, pay later Ponzi schemes are what's building up this market. And these things, if one of those things lets go and the system blows up, that means that the whole market will crash in that segment and cause domino effects. We've literally weaponized or financialized this whole market. Your property only has its value due to the amount of money sloshing around in the system. I thought about this recently when I was at my beach house. When I was walking along the beach house, I'm like, these houses are cool. I want to buy one of these ones. Like, I'm opposite the water. There's houses that are on the water. I always have this little dilemma. If I was on the water, I'd have to pay. But there was a house across the road from me. I paid $1 million, 2 duplexes, only last year actually. And on the water, there was a little fibro house and it went for $4 million, right? $4 million for a knockdown on 400 square meters. And I'm like, wow, that's cool. Like, my place has gone up and tripled or whatever. But if I was to be on the opposite side where the water is, let's just say I bought a house there, I'm like, sand coming in, salt coming in, people walking through your yard, all those sort of questions. But I look at them and I'm like, some of these properties are worth like $8, $9, $10 million for the house. And I'm thinking to myself, who would be able to afford that, right? Where does their money come from? How would they leverage themselves? Maybe in the old days, you could have got into that, but to get into that property now, you'd have to take on a lot of debt to be able to get into that type of asset, or have another asset that you would have to sell off in order to purchase that sort of property. But I'm thinking, imagine if just a couple of things happened, right? If food prices went up so high, right? Just think about this, right? This is where the real risk is, and this is what they need to create a new solution for, which is going to be what causes and what triggers the hyperinflation, right? If people can't afford food, how are they going to make it affordable for people to be able to buy food? If people can't afford to pay for petrol, how are they going to make it affordable for people to pay petrol? If people can't afford to pay their taxes. It goes on, right? Inflation is pushing everything up. If people don't have any access to funds, all of these things don't have value. A bottle of water over a glass of water, you're going to have a little sip. For me to be able to have some water would become the most valuable asset. It doesn't matter if you're driving an Aston Martin or a Lamborghini. The bottle of water would become more valuable than a Lamborghini because it would keep you alive. So where is the real value on everything that can be touched in our lives? Who owns that? Who is controlling it? What is the pent up of demand that's pushing and driving that value to be had? What is driving the house prices to be that way? What is pushing the stock market to be that way? Who benefits from these sort of transactions that are going on at the back end? So I guess my whole point of this video is that your house, even if you have no mortgage on it, right? You're a speculator, you're a person, you're a bystander in this game, right? Of the Ponzi scheme. You have a potential asset of the bank, right? If you have paid at your house, you've got two houses, you've got one house, you've got whatever, right? You're going to retire, you're going to move somewhere. You sell that asset, right, that you own cash. The person that becomes the new person that owns the property would need to go and get a loan most likely, yeah? When that new person goes to get a loan, then that person becomes the security of the bank with their mortgage, plus your asset becomes a cash flow stream for the bank and becomes their asset. So if you are not attached to the bank yet, you're in the market and you're a potential takeover for a bank to be able to take your asset and be able to give it to someone else. So looking at, I know this is pretty deep sort of conversation, but every property in the market is really the asset of the bank, right? Because it's the treasury, right? If someone puts their house up for sale, let's say that house across the road from my beach house that sold for $4 million, that house was not my house, right? That money that got created, let's say that a bank came in and wrote a loan for that house, whatever the case may be, sells for $4 million. That person made my house across the road much more valuable, right? So that is how this market is working. So if you think that, the market's going to implode, the market's going to crash, the news, a guy on TV or whatever, they're all owned by the same place, right? It doesn't matter whether you're looking at Channel 7 News, Channel 10, Channel 9. Who owns these stock-listed companies? BlackRock, Vanguard, they're the bankers' sort of choice, they're the bankers' sort of controlled entities. They're propaganda outlets to change the way you think, you believe and feel and assess things. So there's agendas there that they need to keep in line. They need to keep constantly go around and sticky tape the system back together to hold it together, and they'll create something greater and flashier and brighter and, shinier for people to go chase. People, if you had gone back into the 1990s and said to someone's going to be paying $100,000 for a car that told you got fucking rocks in your head. If you went back to the 1990s and said everybody's going to be having a car loan for $100,000 or $80,000, they're going to be saying you've got rocks in your head, right? The cost of those loans, if you ever notice that every loan becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, it's because the loan is losing its value. The money is losing its value. They have to keep that price of the loan down cheaper so they can expand the base of it to keep the capital growing in the system. And that is what we're about to see. Implode is the value of that capital, right? So we can either see the market implode or we can see the capital that it's based on implodes. If we think that our property is worth $1 million, $500, whatever the case may be, I actually have zero respect for money. I actually don't care what it's worth. My place is worth whatever it is worth. It's worth the bricks. It's worth the human labor to be able to put in there. A property is a property. A phone is a phone. If you're comparing it to, I don't know, some third world country's currency, it's worth $1 trillion, right? The only way that it's worth that is that your belief system in buying into that system and buying into that currency has value, right? And that's where people, have their value in that system. So we're all playing a role in, it doesn't matter if you're a tenant, doesn't matter if you're an owner, it doesn't matter if you hate property, doesn't matter if you hate owners or landlords, or you hate people like me, or hate people that are, the tenant in the property. It doesn't matter where you sit on the field, you're all playing a role in this system for someone that's bigger, greater, and the entity is bigger than all of us that are sitting on either side of the table here. So just thought I'd share that with you. Is your house your asset? Your house is an asset. It is yours because you control it at this point in time, but everybody's asset is the assets of the bankers and those that control the money. The money is where you need to follow. Always say you need to question and follow the trail of where the money leads you to. If you were going on an Easter egg hunt, you'd find all the footsteps to the Easter egg or whatever the case might be. You would need to follow the steps back to who's controlling the money, who's controlling the agenda, and start asking questions around there, because I think at that point you start finding the answers. That's why I love this game. That's why I see the opportunity. That's why I'm always so fucking happy about this. Doesn't matter what's happening out in the world, because I'm seeing their next steps and I'm seeing the options. I'm thinking from their eyes and from their sort of position as to, if this is what we're dealt with, what is our next move? And if you can try and understand what their next move is, you can be one step ahead of that. On that note, if you need help planning your next step, planning your next move, reach out to my team, 1300 367 925. Send us an email at admin@binvested.com.au. If you like this podcast, share it with your friends, your family, like it, leave a comment below, and make sure to always subscribe to us, Apple, Google, Spotify, and we'll catch up soon. Have a great day. Bye for now.
Like Bilal said, man, we're stuck in the matrix. This my advice, don't care if you take it. The dollar about to die, soon to be hyperinflated. This my 2 cents, don't care if you save it. Joint be decentralized and you will see you've been lied to the whole time, and it's the irony, cause they do the exact opposite. You become a slave to the system, enough your money, all they do is profit. There's no conspiracy theory, you better hear me. Crypto will set you free before the system does. I don't care if you do or you don't, but what I'm saying is the truth to the reason you choke. I've never been a failure, excuse my behavior. Keep talking, haters doing me a favor. They all telling lies, I know what they been telling you. I'm the opposite, the Donald Trump of Australia. It's amazing, here for the taking. My time is never wasted, just getting wasted. These girls say I'm really breathtaking. I can't help it if I really misbehaving.